Hey guys, welcome into the Spoken Bee. I'm your host, Rachel Holt. I'm joined by Nick Goss. And Nick, this is our NHL and Bruins podcast for NESN.com. Very exciting stuff.
Very exciting.
Maybe not so exciting is where the Bruins currently sit right now. I foresee this changing around because, as we'll get into, they're dealing with a lot of injuries. But currently the team is 6-7-4. They're on a 4-game losing streak. So let's just get right into it with the state of the Bees here. Not all too exciting at this point in the season.
It's not good, Rachel. They enter Thursday 14th out of 16th in point pace, near the bottom of the Eastern Conference. Injuries have been the biggest factor so far. They can't score goals, tied with Buffalo Sabres for the second fewest goals in the league right now. Granted, the Bruins have played a few less games than a lot of teams in the NHL, but even in a goal per game basis, they're still in the bottom third. The goaltending hasn't been as good as it can be. So they've got a lot of issues right now, and they have to step it up because, as I'm sure we'll talk about later, if you're out of the playoff race on the U.S. Thanksgiving, it's often hard to get back in.
Yeah, it's not a good chunk of games for them. They've lost 6 of their last 8, and surprisingly, they've yet to win against an Eastern Conference foe, which I'm sure for them it is surprising, and I believe they've played 6 games against teams in the Eastern Conference at this point. So certainly a figure they're going to try to change around moving forward.
Yeah, and the schedule doesn't get any easier for them, as we mentioned on the last show. Every team they have left the rest of November either made the playoffs last year or is in a spot this year. They have to play the defending Stanley Cup champions, Pittsburgh Penguins, coming up as well. San Jose, Los Angeles, New Jersey, Edmonton, Tampa Bay. I mean, that's
not
a hard
easy.
grind.
No. Their most recent loss came against the Anaheim Ducks. The Bees lost 4-2. The good news is the team had a season-high 41 shots on net. The bad news is that Ducks goaltender John Gibson was able to turn away 39 of those. I did want to point out, we'll get into their overall effort, but 2 Northeastern Huskies, which I was very excited about as a former Husky myself, scored against the Bruins. I mean, obviously we love the Bruins, but it's nice to see some guys who went through the system here in Massachusetts do well. Kevin Waugh and Josh Manson. Kevin Waugh got his first NHL goal ever, and he was so excited. So I think any hockey fan can take a young kid scoring his first goal, see the excitement on his face, and be excited for him.
It's one of the most exciting things in sports. The teammates go over and grab the puck, and they pose with it on Instagram after. It's a pretty cool moment.
It was cool because his former Northeastern teammate, Josh Manson, he was on the ice with him at the time, and I know Manson said some things about it after, how excited he was for Waugh. So I love to see that, but unfortunately the Bees did lose in that one. What did you think of their overall effort in that game?
Well, they had everything but the finish. You had a huge shot advantage. They led in shot attempts. They had a +6 margin scoring chances according to Natural Stat Trick, a stat site. They created enough chances to win, certainly, but a few defensive mistakes cost them, and they just couldn't finish their chances. And that's going to happen when you're missing guys like Brad Marchand, David Krejci, Ryan Spooner. When you're missing some of your high-end offensive skill guys, you're going to need others to step up, and right now they don't have that right now. And you know, going up again in Thursday and Saturday against the Kings and Sharks, 2 very good defensive teams, 2 teams who have excellent goaltending. The Bruins are going to have to finish their chances better, or they're going to leave this California trip with 0 points. We
mentioned those injuries. Let's get into those a little bit. I think the Bruins at this point are just waiting for those injured players to slowly return to the lineup. One of the big guys out, Brad Marchand, he's been ruled out for the first 2 games of the team's 3-game road trip over on the West Coast. So you're telling me now that he's on the IR?
The Bruins have not said anything, but on their website, him and Anders Bjork are on injured reserve. We already knew that Brad Marchand was not going to play Thursday against the Kings. Now it looks like he won't play against the San Jose Sharks on Saturday either. Obviously a huge loss. His 8 goals are second on the team. One of the better goal scorers in the league, quite frankly. Bjork had a really nice start to the year, his first full season in the NHL. Him, Marchand, and Bergeron really formed a solid chemistry on that top line. So not good news for the Bruins. However, it looks like Krejci will be back in the lineup Thursday night. They need that. Their power play is 5 for 33 during Krejci's absence. That's the 8th worst in the league during that span. So hopefully he can bring some offensive skill to that unit that really needs it.
Now, in addition to those 3 guys you just mentioned, they're without David Backes, Ryan Spooner, Adam McQuaid. So they're certainly missing a few key parts of their lineup and some guys that have veterans of the team, guys that know what they're doing out there. So they're dealing with some young guys out there. How much has that affected them in the games that they've played?
I think it really has affected them. They have a ton of young players in the lineup, and with young players, there are going to be mistakes, positional mistakes, physical mistakes, mental mistakes. And you know, a guy like McQuaid, who's not going to give you a ton of offense, but he kills penalties. He's extremely tough on the puck. He's a leader on and off the ice. His absence right now is pretty big because they don't have a lot of veteran experience on that blue line. They got a lot of young guys with Carlo, McAvoy, even Krug is a young player. So, these injuries, it's not only affecting their offense, but it's affecting how they're playing the defensive end as well.
Now, with those injuries, you're seeing some of the other guys like Bergeron, get more minutes on the ice. Bruce Cassidy mentioned the burden this places on the other players, the injuries on the team. He said, you want to stay in the moment and you want to win games, but you also want to make sure you're not overtaxing players. So how do you juggle all that? That's the challenge that we have as a staff right now, and that is what is in front of us. Do you think they've been overtaxing anyone at this point? I
think it is a little too early for that. Char leads the team with about 23 minutes a game. That's not too high for him. But Bergeron, with his history of some injuries, he's their most important player by far. He's about 21-15 a game right now. That's not too bad. You probably want to get it under 20 if you can. But with McQuaid out and Backus and Krejci out, now Bergeron's got to play a lot on the power play, a lot on the penalty kill, and of course he always plays a ton on 5-on-5. So his minutes are going up on special teams, and that's dragging them up with these injuries. But the Bruins don't have a choice right now. He's a tremendous offensive player. He's a great playmaker. He defends the other opponent's top lines. He's going to have to play well and play a lot for them to win right now with these injuries. So it's unfortunate, but they really don't have a choice.
We've mentioned their record. We've mentioned that the team currently sits in 14th out of the 16 Eastern Conference teams. Would you argue, though, that it's hard to assess the team at this point, given all the injuries? I mean, we really haven't seen what this team can do playing with everyone on the ice.
Right. It is very difficult to assess this team. They started out pretty well, and coming in, I thought they had a really good mixture of youth and veterans. But the fact of the matter is they're towards the bottom of the Eastern Conference and they have to get points as fast as they can. Injuries, every team goes through injuries, usually maybe not as bad as this, but the Bruins have to really dig deep here, because if they're not in it by next month, it could be a real grind the second half of the season.
One of the issues, I guess you could say, is the Bruins offense. In their last 10 games, there have only been 2 games in which they've scored more than 2 goals in those games, and they've scored just 44 goals this season, which is tied for the second fewest in the NHL. Now, do you think the problem is that they don't have goal scorers on this team? I mean, the lack of scoring depth is what some people are pointing to. With Marchand and Pastrnak, they've accounted for 40% of the Bruins' goals. So clearly relying on 2 guys very heavily, one of them who's injured right now.
They really are. 18 of the 44, as you mentioned, and nobody else has more than 4 goals. So that's a problem. I mean, they need more from the bottom 6. I understand they have a lot of inexperienced and young guys on that bottom 6, but they have to get more production from that group. When you have guys, when you have 2 players who are getting 44% of your goals, and one of them's out, and he's one of the best goal scorers in the league, other guys have to step up, and quite frankly, the Bruins haven't gotten that kind of effort and production from the other players, and they need that, and they need it ASAP.
But is this something that you think, hey, the guys are young, that they're bringing up, the young talent that they're bringing up for Providence, that they're getting in there? Can this happen over time, over the season? I
think it can. It's a lot to ask guys right now like Jake DeBrusk and Danton Heinen, who are really getting their first major test in the NHL, to, okay, guys, you were in Providence for the most of all of last season. Now you got to come up and be a top 6 forward. We need you to be really good every night, scoring goals at a good clip. It's really tough to ask young players to do that, but the Bruins don't have a choice right now. So I think there are going to be a lot of growing pains. I think in the long term, this experience will help these young guys. But as far as right now, I think it's going to be a slow process.
Now I want to ask, can Tuukka Rask be doing more? Because he's one of the best goaltenders in the league, everyone knows this, but in each of his last 5 games, he's given up 3 goals or more in those games. I mean, is this a case where he should be saving some of those goals and helping out his team a little bit more, or is it not his fault?
I think some of the goals last night were not his fault, but quite honestly, and I've been one of the biggest Rask defenders for years, he needs to be better. 901 save percentage, 897 right now actually is not good enough for a goalie who's one of the top 10 in the league, in my opinion. I understand that there are a lot of young defensemen on this team who are making mistakes, and you're going to have to go through that. But with the Bruins missing so many key forwards and not scoring enough goals, Rask is going to have to steal some of these games. And we've seen in the past he's done that many times in his career, whether it be the regular season or the playoffs. He's a tremendous goaltender, but he does need to give the team a boost here because he's their last line of defense. And when you're not scoring goals, your goalie has to step up, and he needs to play better.
So what is the biggest key for the Bruins at this point right now?
I think it would have to be goaltending. As I mentioned, the injuries have been a real problem, and one thing the Bruins have, you're looking for consistency in times of crisis, and Rask can play a lot of games. We've seen that. He's one of the better goaltenders in the league, and I think if he steps up and steals some of these games, it can really stave off some of these scoring woes and get the team back on track. So I think he's the most important player right now.
Nick, at this point in the season, well, we're a week away from Thanksgiving, and I bring that up not only because I love turkey and pumpkin pie, but it's an important measuring stick in the hockey world. At this point, Thanksgiving Day, most teams are a quarter of the way into the season, and there's this crazy stat. For the last decade, teams in one of the playoff positions on Thanksgiving Day have made the postseason roughly 77% of the time. That means teams hovering around a playoff spot, like the Bruins right now, have a roughly 25% chance of making the postseason. I think the Bruins are in a unique position where we're not seeing the team as it can perform and the talent that they do have. And Cassidy was asked about it, and he said, given the amount of adversity that we've dealt with, I think we're going to have to let the Thanksgiving thing go a bit, adding we don't even know what our true team looks like right now. So do you agree with that we can't really assess the Bruins on that?
I do. At the same time, they've lost 4 straight, and like as I mentioned, they're 14th of 16 teams in point pace. And the injuries have been a problem, but they've got to start getting some points here. I know a lot of teams have 2 or 3 games on them in the standings, but right now the Metropolitan Division is an absolute gauntlet. I think that both wild card teams are going to come out of that division, which means in the Atlantic, the only 3 teams that would get in would be the top 3 teams in that division. And right now, the Bruins are 7 points back of Ottawa, who are in 3rd in the division. So, although I think normally I would agree with Cassidy and say, yeah, with all the injuries, it's unfair to assess the team. And when these guys get back, we know the team is really good and capable of playing at a much better pace. But at the same time, looking at the other division and looking where they are right now, the Bruins have to get going here. It's going to be really tough.
Next up, the Bees are in the midst of a 4-game road trip right now, including 3 games out west. They face the Los Angeles Kings on Thursday night at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The Kings have lost 3 in a row, and the last time these 2 teams faced each other, there's a very dramatic ending in overtime in which the Bees unfortunately lost due to a goal in the final second. I mean, you couldn't get closer to the buzzer in this one. So what are you expecting out of these next 3 games, we'll call it?
I expect goaltending to take shape here. I mentioned earlier that Rask needs to be good for the Bruins, but Jonathan Quick, Los Angeles Kings, one of the better goalies in the league this year. Martin Jones of the San Jose Sharks led their team to the Stanley Cup final 2 years ago. And Corey Schneider of the New Jersey Devils, one of the best goalies, BC alum. So the Bees are going to face good goaltending. 2 teams that have very good blue lines, play a physical, hard, well-coached game, very well structured. Goals are not going to be easy to come by, so they really have to dig in and bury their chances. If they go down 2 or 3-0 or 2 or 3 goal deficit, any of these games, it's going to be tough to come back with their injuries they have right now. So they have to get good starts, good goaltending, and not make too many mistakes in their own zone. You
mentioned the wins are tough to come by in these ones. Now, what would be a good measuring stick for the Bruins right now to say this trip was a success?
I think if they could get 4 points on this trip, 4 points in 4 games, I think that would be good. All 3 of these teams are playoff caliber teams. New Jersey's really surprised. They have a ton of rookies who are doing very well. Nico Hershiser has done very well as the #1 overall pick. San Jose and LA are 2 of the perennial contenders in the West. So if they could get 4 points out of the next 3 games, I think that would be a good way to salvage this trip and come back home for 2 very tough games against Sidney Crosby and the Penguins and Connor McDavid and the Oilers.
I know we're focusing a lot on the Bruins here, obviously, but around the league there's some exciting things going on. The Tampa Bay Lightning, man, this team looks incredible. They're the clear front runner right now, 14-2-2. They lead the NHL in wins with 14, points with 30, and goals per game. So right there, pretty incredible.
Yeah, identical 7-1-1 records both at home and on the road. Plus 25 goal differential is by far the best in the league. This team has very few weaknesses: goaltending, defense, offense, great coaching. Injuries have, as we mentioned last show, injuries have decimated them the last few years. Stamkos is back. He looks like the elite player that he was back when he was scoring 50 goals. Nikita Kucherov looks like just every bit as a star. And Victor Hedman is one of the best defensemen in the league. So from top to bottom, they have it all. And unless they suffer some catastrophic injuries to Stamkos or Kucherov or someone, I would expect them to get to at least the conference finals.
Stamkos leads the league with 31 points, and Kucherov is not too far behind him. He has 30. They have not faced the Bruins yet, so obviously everyone will be looking forward to that matchup. And hopefully the Bruins have some warm and healthy bodies at that point, because their first game of the season will be Wednesday, November 29th at the Garden, so mark that in your calendars. But definitely excited to see how these two teams match up.
Yeah, the Bruins have actually done pretty well against the Lightning historically, going back the last 7 or 8 years. But of course, they have a lot of injuries right now, and Tampa Bay is playing as well as they have maybe ever, even as well as they did when they won the Stanley Cup about 15, 13, 14 years ago. So it's going to be a tough one, but the Bruins usually seem to bring their best when the Lightning come to town.
If you're reading the NHL headlines today, you may have seen Houston paired with a possible NHL team coming to it. The NHL had preliminary discussions about a team in Houston. Now, there's a report that NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman met with the owner of the Houston Rockets, Tillman Fertitta, about the possibility of a team there. Today, Fertitta made a statement on Twitter. As I've mentioned before, I'm very interested in the possibility of bringing the NHL to Houston, but it will have to be a deal that works for my organization. So we're adding Houston to the list, along with Seattle and Quebec, as a potential city where an NHL team may land.
Yeah, as a huge fan of the Quebec Nordiques, I think Quebec City is the #1 location the NHL should go to. Obviously, there are some concerns there. Despite having a beautiful new arena and tons of rabid hockey fans, Canadian dollar is always a sticking point to a lot of people. It would be the smallest market by far in the league. The Eastern Conference already has more teams in the West, so there's that imbalance there. I think Seattle would be great as well, but Houston, for me, it's kind of surprising that Dallas got a team before Houston. I think Houston is one of the better markets for sports really anywhere in the country. The Astros have done well, obviously winning the World Series. The Rockets have been very well supported. They have a very nice arena there at the Rock. I think it's the Toyota Center down there. So they have really everything you need. They have the amount of fans there. They have good ownership. It's a huge TV market as well, which NBC I'm sure would love. They have the NHL rights. I think Houston makes the most sense in the United States, although I would put Quebec City ahead of them slightly.
Wow, I know that had to hurt for you.
Yeah, I really think the NHL should be in Quebec City, but Houston, as far as a market and a business standpoint, makes the most sense for the NHL. And I think it's a better market than Vegas would be. We've seen the success Vegas has had. They're in second place. And I think the success that Vegas has had is going to make it even more expensive to own a team.
And that's a fun team to watch this year for sure.
Right.
I like Houston a lot. We were there for the Super Bowl this past year. I mean, it was a fun city. It was a great energy about it. They obviously love their sports. They care for sports. So I'm all for it. Let's do it. NHL in Houston. Last but not least, we have to talk about this huge brawl that took place in Detroit versus Calgary on Wednesday. Walk us through this, because I watched the clips on YouTube and I was just dumbfounded. I loved it.
You don't often. It was great. You don't often see players fight as they're leaving the benches, going to the locker room. But when that sort of stuff happens, all bets are off. Everybody comes in together. Even the goalies were getting into it a little bit. Matthew Tkachuk's stirring stuff up. He loves to do that. These two teams really wouldn't say hate each other. There's not a lot of real history between these teams. But Calgary is struggling this year. Detroit was picked to be in last place the whole year, so they're playing with chip on their shoulder. They're actually doing pretty well. So I think it was just a combination of the lopsided score, which always plays a factor, plus a couple guys running around and living on the edge there with some borderline hits. So, I mean, 3 10-minute misconducts from one of the players, I believe, which you don't see very often. So it was great. We don't see a lot of fighting in the NHL, and that's probably good with all the concussions we've had recently. But it's always nice to see a good old-fashioned brawl every now and then. And
it sounded like the players loved it after, too. Mm-hmm. And everyone knew that they were doing something exciting for the fans. Yeah. Hey, I say more brawls if we can.
Right. I mean, what's wrong with that? A little violence, isn't too bad every now and then.
We're very destructive. All right, that will do it for this episode. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure you keep it on NESN.com for all of your Bruins news.